let us pivot to our preview of the NFC East. If you have been listening to the previous shows, you know how this goes. We will go in order of last year's division finish, which starts us with the Dallas Cowboys, 12-5 last year. Dak Prescott, 4,449 passing yards, 37 touchdowns, 10 picks. He was the QB7. Ezekiel Elliott, just over 1,000 yards rushing, 10 rushing touchdowns, the RB7. And CD Lamb, 79 catches, 1,100 yards, 6 touchdowns. He was the wide receiver 19. Mike, we have talked a lot about Ezekiel Elliott. He has been a central focus of conversation for fantasy Twitter for a good chunk of the summer. So now here we are, nearing the end of the preseason, just a little ways away from games that count for real starting. I know that you were not big on Ezekiel Elliott. I know you have started to maybe change your mind about that. So here we go. Final answer. When is the earliest you would draft Zeke?
I would take him in the 4th round. But on one condition. Travis Etienne and Breece Hall would need to be off the board already. I have moved those guys. I think they have higher upside. But it all depends on the team build, right? I can't take him in the 3rd round because I'm probably going to take Kyle Pitts or one of those other running backs or a receiver, something like that. But if I need a running back and I'm sitting there in the 4th round and Etienne and Breece Hall are gone, I'm likely to take Ezekiel Elliott because at that point, I think he'll be kind of similar to what he was last year, right? Like he won't be, I don't think, a top 7 running back weekly, but he'll probably finish top 10 on volume alone if he stays healthy. And I will even admit he was definitely better before the knee injury last year. So there still is reason for optimism there. I've kind of met in the middle. I went from not drafting him at all to kind of being so-so on him.
I think I could take him in the 3rd round. And you mentioned the draft that we were in last night. He went, I think, early 3rd round in that when it was a 14-team league. I started with a pair of wide receivers. And if by some weirdness he had fallen, and I was in the 9th slot, if he had fallen to the 9th slot in the 3rd round, I definitely would have taken him. He was gone, so it wasn't an issue for me. I'm just sort of going by what everyone in Dallas is saying, that they still want him to be the workhorse. That as much as, fantasy Twitter loves Tony Pollard and wants to give him a gold jacket already and put him in the Cowboy Ring of Honor, the Cowboys themselves have talked about, trying to make him a slot receiver occasionally just to get him on the field. So that means this backfield still really belongs to Zeke. And yes, he was not great at times last year. Yes, he was banged up last year, but this is a guy that you can still pencil in for 280, 290 touches per season. When you look at his carries and the targets and the receptions he's going to get, we want guys who get that kind of volume, and it's hard to find. And I think when he's healthy and he's right, I still think he has really good upside. He does have that RB1, that top 10 upside. And so, I know we want to kick dirt on these guys, especially once they get older and they take a few hits and what have you. And I know that his contract is an albatross around the Cowboys. That's got nothing to do with my fantasy team. Like, I don't have to pay Ezekiel Elliott a dime, so I don't really care what Jerry Jones is writing him for checks. So I don't know, and maybe this is me sort of being contrarian because the whole rest of the world seems to have moved on from Zeke, and I'm over here screaming like he's not done yet. So this could just be me sort of being contrarian, but I really do feel like at this point I'm higher on Zeke than a lot of other people. Who knows? We could get to January, and I could look like an idiot. But this is kind of where I stand.
Genius.
I'm okay.
I think like on that team you were saying yesterday, if you start like wide receiver, and Zeke's there in the late 3rd, I think that's a fine pick because you're like, this is a guy that I know I can start every week. This is a guy that I know is going to get 15 to 20 touches, something like that. I think that like it all, to me, it depends on your team build. Like if I had an already, maybe I'd be more inclined to go with the receiver. But if you took him there yesterday, you would have no issues for me.
All right. Yeah, I think that has been one of the interesting conversations in the offseason. I think we've probably beaten it to death, but I figured this one last hit. It's like, it's like Office Space, man. Michael Bolton getting one last shot on the copier before they pull him away.
We're gonna miss Zeke when he's gone, though.
I'll tell you that. We absolutely are gonna miss Zeke when he's gone. All right. So I talked about the fact that I took 2 wide receivers in the first 2 rounds of that draft. I started with Jamar Chase. I came back around and I got CD Lamb in the 2nd round. There's a lot of excitement about CD Lamb this year. I think with Amari Cooper gone, there's the thought that he really makes that big leap. For you, what's the highest possible finish you can imagine for Lamb this year?
This might sound like a hot take, but I think he could finish as the best wide receiver in fantasy football.
Ooh.
And I to me, that start that you have is amazing. By the way, Chase and Lamb. Talent has never been the question with CD Lamb. We know he can be a downfield receiver. We know he's great in the red and in the end zone. And the only questions I think that he had the last couple of years was he going to see enough volume to finish as highly as we would have liked? And I've been very bullish on CD Lamb since he's entered the league. And this year, at first, I was like, I don't know where. And then they got rid of Cooper, and they did nothing to replace him except for draft Jalen Tolbert pretty much. And they lost Cedric Wilson too. Like, there's so many vacated targets right now that CD Lamb could easily lead the NFL in targets this year. And he's going to get more usage in the red zone and those high valuable targets. So I have him ranked as the 6th best wide receiver. I think there's 5 guys who I like their chances better of finishing as the top fantasy receiver, but I think CD Lamb deserves to be in that group.
I mean, I definitely think he deserves to be in that group. For me, I think the absolute ceiling for him is a top 3 finish. I'm not willing to go all the way number 1. I still think Justin Jefferson's in that conversation. I don't think you can count out Cooper Kupp. Jamar Chase is there. But I do think because of the opportunity in front of him, especially in the early part of the season, as other guys are working in, Michael Gallup is still working his way back from injury. There are going to be targets galore. And if you believe Jerry Jones, who always has something to say, usually praising his team. He's saying Dak Prescott's having the best camp he's ever seen as a Cowboy. Since Dak's been a Cowboy, I should say. If Dak has that kind of success in the regular season, a lot of it's probably going to be because he's leaning on CD Lamb. So, we always knew that there was this potential there. That was the reason he was, we're talking about him as a high dynasty draft pick the moment he was drafted. I thought he had a very good rookie season. Now, it seems like all the obstacles are out of his way. So I'm expecting really big things from CD Lamb. I think he's going to be great this year. All right. So that gets us to our staple in these segments. First Cowboy you would draft, a Cowboy sleeper, and a Cowboys player to avoid.
First player would be CD Lamb. I think he deserves to go late first, early second round. Sleeper, I mentioned him, but Jalen Tolbert, he's a 3rd round pick they used at the receiver. Really the only guy of note that they brought in after losing Wilson and Amari Cooper. So I think there could be volume there, especially early on, because my player to avoid is Michael Gallup. He has been falling down draft boards lately, but he's from the start someone that I have been completely out on. January, torn ACL. A lot of studies say that the soonest he can really get back to football activities is September. I would not be surprised if we don't see really much of all of Michael Gallup this season as he continues to recover for next year. So I like Jalen Tolbert, but the Cowboys, Marcus, are one of these teams that I feel like most of their players are appropriately priced in fantasy.
Yeah, I think so. And that's why I think my answers mirror yours exactly. I mean, CD Lamb's the first guy off the board, even though like I said, I know I'm higher on Zeke than a lot of people, but I still would take CD Lamb earlier. Jalen Tolbert is probably the sleeper just because of, look, there's no one else that you feel like is going to sneak up on people, right? I mean, everybody likes Dalton Schultz. He's not a sleeper there. Tony Pollard, like I said, his name's going to be hanging up there next to Roger Staubach sometime soon if you judge by fantasy Twitter. So he's not sneaking up on anybody. So you got Tolbert there, and our pal Hytham Kalani might be shocked to hear me say this. I am finally off the Michael Gallup train. He has given me Hytham's given me a hard time for the last few years for still trying to make fetch happen with Gallup. But I don't know that it's going to happen this year, just because he's still trying to get healthy right now. And I think at this point we've sort of kind of seen who Michael Gallup is. It just, I think unfortunately the stars never quite aligned for him to be that big breakout star that we thought he could be. And I think coming off a major injury, I don't know that it's going to happen for him this year. So I'm finally off the Michael Gallup train. Yeah, happy Hytham. It finally happened.
Until next year. Then we'll
Until
be
next
back.
year. Right. There's something, something's going to happen. We're going to get like he's going to go to a new team next year or something. We'll get these glowing training camp reports, and I'm back in. It'll happen. I know. I totally see how it's going to happen. All right. We've talked a lot. Let's take a quick break. We'll come back. We will go through the rest of the NFC East. That's next on the NFL Fantasy Football Show. On to the Philadelphia Eagles. They were 9-8 last year, lost in the wild card round. They had a rough go against the Tampa Bay Bucks last year in the playoffs. But your passing leader, Jalen Hurts, he of the just almost locked in 20 fantasy points per game, it felt like. Just over 3,100 passing yards, 16 touchdowns, 9 interceptions. He was the QB9. He was the QB9 mostly because he was also Philly's leading rusher, 784 yards, 10 rushing touchdowns, which is a really, really big number for anybody, but especially for a quarterback. Their leading receiver, Devontae Smith, 64 catches, 916 yards, 5 receiving touchdowns. That made him the wide receiver 30. So as I was going through Philly's numbers last year and what I could expect from them this year, obviously people are excited about A.J. Brown coming over. We like Devontae Smith. I think he's a good secondary receiver in that offense. People like Dallas Goedert. People like Jalen Hurts. But we like Jalen Hurts mostly because he runs the football. And it led me to wonder, is there enough passing volume to sustain 3 pass catchers? When we know A.J. Brown is the alpha, we know Dallas Goedert's going to get his opportunities. I mean, is there enough for Devontae Smith to eat enough that we are going to feel confident drafting him?
I don't think so. And to be honest, I've kind of at cost, I've let other people take any of the 3 Eagles pass catchers. Like AJ Brown is an alpha, like you said, but the issue is he goes around in drafts with other alphas on teams that I feel more confident will sustain, multiple pass catchers. I think AJ Brown will see a good amount of volume. I think it could be week to week with Devonta Smith and Dallas Goedert. I think because Goddard is a tight end, I'm more willing to draft him than I am Smith, but the people who look at this and say like, well, look at what Philly did in the first 6 weeks last year. They want to throw the ball more. It's like, well, they completely abandoned that game plan, ran the ball more than anyone, went on a huge run and made the playoffs. So are we very confident of that? I don't think A.J. Brown means they want to go back to passing as heavy as they did. I think it means they want to be a little bit more balanced, and they want, when they do throw the ball, for it to be easier on Jalen Hurts, similar to what we saw a couple years ago out of the Ravens. Like, they brought in pass catchers. They didn't abandon their run and their style of play. It just makes it easier on the quarterback when you do throw the ball. So for me, I like this Philly team. I think they're going to be really fun in real life. A.J. Brown brings all that swag and stuff, but I've kind of let other people draft all 3 of these guys, and it might come back to haunt me, but I'm going to get their production baked into Jalen Hurts.
Yeah, I think that's sort of the way a lot of people, I think, are drafting this team, where Hurts is going to get his. I like AJ Brown. I think we had the question on Fantasy Live last week: is he being overdrafted or underdrafted at wide receiver 11? And I'm like, I don't know. That feels about right. I mean, I feel like a top 12 finish is in the range of outcomes for AJ Brown, so I'm okay with that. And so I think he gets his. And it's a battle week to week to see, as you mentioned, is it going to be Goddard? Is it going to be Smith? Knowing that, every now and then we may have we may have the Quez Watkins week thrown in there somewhere every once in a while.
Jalen Reagor is gonna disrupt people's fantasy seasons, I think.
I know. I just remember, his rookie year, I bought in, I heard all these stories that he, that no one in camp could cover Jalen Reagor, and he was like going to be a thing. And like, I would say I have swung and missed on Eagles wide receivers, but then if it makes me feel any better, the Eagles have swung and missed on Eagles wide receivers, right? Like, I swung and missed on Jalen Reagor. I spent 2 years trying to convince myself that JJ Arcega-Whiteside was like a deep sleeper somewhere, and now he's playing tight end somewhere else. So
Seattle's hyping him up now.
So. Yeah. Seattle, like the Seahawks social media is doing like hype videos about J-Jaw. So like, so I got it wrong, but then, so did the Eagles. So I guess that makes me feel better. I think for me, the only pass catcher I have any real consistent week to week faith in is going to be AJ Brown. And so for that reason, he's kind of the only guy that I really have drafted from Philadelphia's roster. Which sort of begs the next question, right? Jalen Hurts runs the football effectively. That's part of why we love him. The rest is sort of a mess. Miles Sanders has been banged up, has missed a ton of practice with a hamstring injury. They're sort of taking it slow with him, getting him back into action. How are you approaching the Eagles' backfield, if at all?
I'm fading Miles Sanders hard. Like I've drafted a lot of teams already. If you can count best ball, I don't believe I have Miles Sanders on any of them.
Mm.
And then I'll take a deeper shot on Kenny Gainwell, who is going deeper in drafts. You could get him in like the double digit rounds. He looks really good in preseason. And I just think he brings more to the table than a Miles Sanders, who's a more traditional running back. Gainwell can keep teams guessing because he is an effective runner. He has even been effective near the goal line in the little bit that we've seen him in the NFL. But you never know, is he going to run a route out of the backfield or anything like that? So much like obviously he's not at the level of like a Christian McCaffrey or an Austin Eckler, but the fact that what those guys do and make the offense so unpredictable when they're out there, I think Kenny Gainwell can do that, and he's much cheaper to get. So I'll gladly take a shot on him and not Miles Sanders, who, I mean, Devin Singletary feels bad for Miles Sanders. That's how little they let him score touchdowns.
Last year, I think, was the year I finally let go of the rope on Miles Sanders. I mean, he was a guy that I really loved. I know I wasn't alone. I know a lot of fantasy Twitter wanted him to get more opportunities to be a bigger part of the Philadelphia offense. But, here we are entering year 4. And the one thing the Eagles seem to consistently be saying to us is that we don't love Miles Sanders as just a pure RB1 the way the rest of you do. They keep finding other players to work in there. They keep kind of using him. He's sort of the starter, but kind of in name only. I mean, he's not anything close to being a 3-down back. He's very much a platoon guy. So I think last year it got to the point for me, especially because he didn't have a single touchdown at all last year. It just became too frustrating. And so I'm completely out on Miles Sanders. I don't love any of the other guys enough to draft them. This is a weird offense, man. It's Jalen Hurts, it's AJ Brown, and then, maybe you talk yourself into somebody else, but there's just not a lot that it gets me excited, which is going to make this next section really interesting when we talk about the first player to draft, the sleeper, and the player to avoid. I have a sneaking suspicion we may have the same names for these as well.
Yeah, the first player drafted, I said I'm not heavily targeting him, but I will admit AJ Brown 100% deserves to be the first player drafted. If not him, then I think you wait until Jalen Hurts. I really wouldn't want many Eagles in between there. Sleeper, for me, it's Kenneth Gainwell for all the reasons I just said. Player to avoid, I mean, Miles Sanders, Devonta Smith, Dallas Goedert. This is one of those offenses, Marcus, that I think it'll be better in real life. And there's a lot of real life talent there, but it's just so uncertain for fantasy that I just don't want to deal with the headache.
Yeah, I'm with you. AJ Brown's my first guy drafted, which again is another strike in the column of, hey, we got to change quarterback scoring, right? If Jalen Hurts is probably the best fantasy option on this team, but he's far from being the first fantasy option drafted, right? We're drafting AJ Brown. I mean, if you are of a mind to draft Miles Sanders, you're probably drafting him before you're drafting Jalen Hurts. I don't know, maybe they're around the same spot, but he is by far the best fantasy option, but he is definitely not the first player that we're drafting. I guess, for sleeper, it's probably Kenneth Gainwell. I don't know. I guess when they play the Giants, you can make a case for Boston Scott because he seems to be a notorious New York Giant killer. But for the other 15 games that are on the schedule for the Eagles, maybe it's Kenneth Gainwell there. And I am avoiding Miles Sanders. Just because it's been so inconsistent with the usage, and now this nagging hamstring injury sort of makes me even more wary of drafting him. So probably staying away, and maybe Devonta Smith, which makes me sad because I really loved him last year.
Same.
But AJ Brown is going to definitely impact whatever production, what kind of target share he's going to get. So I'm not nearly as excited about him this year as I was a year ago. All right, over to the Washington. Well, last year they were the Washington football team. This year they are the Washington Commanders. It feels like all the news they have made this offseason has not been for football and generally has not been good, but that doesn't have anything to do with us. Last year they were 7-10. Taylor Heineke was your leading passer, 3,419 yards, 20 touchdowns, 15 interceptions, the QB 19, which surprised me. Antonio Gibson, your leading rusher, just over 1,000 yards on the ground, 7 rushing touchdowns, the RB10. And no surprise, your leading receiver, Terry McLaurin, 77 catches, 1,053 yards, 5 receiving touchdowns, the wide receiver, 25. As much as we've talked about Ezekiel Elliott and his fluctuations in ADP and how people feel about him, Antonio Gibson has been a fantasy mover just in the wrong direction. It feels like all the stories about Antonio Gibson have been negative this preseason, and maybe sort of hit rock bottom for us when the report came out that he was working with the punt team. Then he was playing, with the twos in a preseason game, playing with Taylor Heineke on the field. I know that some people have sort of tried to say that, hey, maybe this was just, a preseason punishment for fumbling in a preseason game, and maybe we shouldn't read too much into it, and we've all lost our minds, and people are going to be sorry, in mid-season when Antonio Gibson's doing big things. Maybe. I'm just trying to read the tea leaves. As for you, when you're reading the tea leaves, how do you feel about Antonio Gibson?
Not great. And for people who, aren't watching every snap in preseason like we are, Marcus, last week he fumbled. Then we saw Brian Robinson come in, play really well. We didn't see Gibson again until he played with the twos. Then all week he's fielding punts, like you said. He's practicing with the twos. And then preseason the second week starts. Brian Robinson gets the start, gets all of the early down work with the starters, looks good doing so, and even getting catches out of the backfield. Antonio Gibson's playing the third down role there. And some people were like, this is more meaningful because he's going to take that role. And I'm like, well, no, he's not. He's playing this because J.D. McKissic is inactive, because J.D. McKissic already has this role on lock. Like, they don't need to see anything more out of him there. And then when Brian Robinson got taken out of the game with Wentz and the other starters, Gibson played with the twos, getting actual running back work. So what this tells me is that Gibson right now is the backup in what is a legit competition. And I haven't been interested in drafting Antonio Gibson in the 6th, 7th round. I'll say the same thing, though. If Brian Robinson and his ADP were flipped, I would not be interested in taking Brian Robinson in the 6th, 7th round, because I just think this could be a situation, Marcus, where it's back and forth all year. It feels pretty volatile and wide open right now. And this is on an offense that is probably going to be at best middle of the pack. So I just think you're better suited at full price, letting someone else have that headache. If you could get Antonio Gibson, in like the 10th round, sure. I think at that point he's a shot worth taking, but higher than that, I'm not really interested.
It's just a messy backfield. I'm just sort of in my head tracing the timeline for Antonio Gibson, right? It looked for a day or two like J.D. McKissic was going to go to Buffalo, and everybody was really excited. It seemed like that opened the door for Gibson to kind of be more of that workhorse back. Then McKissic decided he didn't want to pack up a U-Haul, and he stayed in DC instead, and suddenly everybody was off Gibson. Then Washington goes out and they draft Brian Robinson, and then there was more disappointment. And then just everything that's happened throughout training camp in the preseason has just done nothing but to chip away at Gibson's ADP. And look, maybe some of us are wrong, right? Maybe Washington is just trying some things out. Maybe they are just sort of punishing him for ball security issues. Maybe. Or maybe this ends up as a really messy 3-headed back committee in an offense that's not going to score a ton of points this year and make us very, very worried. I look at this. So, Flory, I look at this situation versus, say, Buffalo, where watching the Bills over the weekend, you saw Devin Singletary go and he played well. Then James Cook came in and he caught a couple of passes, and Zach Moss is starting to get more attention. He's starting to do more things there. That's a messy 3-headed running back situation, but the Bills are going to score a lot of points this year. So that makes you feel at least you can tell yourself a story where, hey, look, Devin Singletary still has some value, right? That maybe Zach Moss, if he's the goal line back, has touchdown upside. James Cook's going to catch a lot of passes or what have you. You can sort of tell yourself a story. I can't tell myself that same story with Washington just because, just to put it mildly, Carson Wentz is not Josh Allen. I can't make myself believe that this 3-headed situation in Washington is going to be nearly as productive potentially as the 3-headed situation in Buffalo.
No, I think you're hoping to get a share of their one potential touchdown that a running back could get each week. And if If it doesn't go, like if you start Robinson and Gibson scores the touchdown that week, I mean, if McKissick's getting all the catches, you could be looking at a situation where their starting running back runs for like 70 yards or 80 yards in fantasy. That's 8 points. Like that's just not getting it done.
So obviously a lot of the offense is going to run through what happens with Carson Wentz. You know, he was the acquisition in the offseason after the Colts decided they'd seen enough. I went back and looked because I think the immediate thought was, okay, Wentz isn't great, but hey, like it was Taylor Heineke last year. And I went back and looked, and in terms of passing yards, they really weren't that far apart. I guess the big difference is Wentz didn't throw as many interceptions, had more touchdowns, didn't throw as many interceptions. But it just kind of got me to thinking, the knee jerk was, well, they went out and got Wentz to be the starter. This is sort of an upgrade. But when you look at it, I mean, is it a significant upgrade? Are we really like, hey man, Terry McLaurin's got it made now that he's got Carson Wentz instead of Taylor Heineke? Did they really, really improve themselves that much at the quarterback position by going to get Carson Wentz?
They did, but not by a whole lot, I would say. And it's sad to say for like the fourth time we get to say like this is the best quarterback Terry McLaurin's ever played with.
He's the new Allen Robinson.
Carson Wentz. Yeah, it really is. And when they traded for Carson Wentz, I went and compared him and Heineke's numbers, and on the like face value, it was nearly identical. I agree with that. What stood out to me though was on passes of 20 plus air yards. Taylor Heineke really struggled doing so. Carson Wentz was middle of the pack. And I'm not saying Carson Wentz is a great deep ball thrower, but 12% higher completion percentage last year on those passes, much higher passer rating, 5 yards more per attempt than Taylor Heineke. So I don't think he is, even a top 20 quarterback at this point in his career, Carson Wentz. But I do think he's a better deep ball thrower, which, I mean, if we're looking for silver linings for Terry McLaurin is a pretty good downfield receiver. So hopefully that leads to some more long passes for Terry McLaurin. But I mean, we could be doing this again next year where we're talking about it's a new quarterback here and potentially, I mean, if Wentz struggles, we could late season, if they're out of it, like Sam Howell has looked the part in preseason. Maybe they throw him in there.
Sam Howell. He's the guy who only eats chicken nuggets, right? If I'm remembering correctly.
Is that him? I think so.
I started Googling. I said Sam Howell chicken and nuggets, just like it just auto-filled for me. So yeah, he's the guy who pretty much only eats.
Isn't it wild the information that your brain like retains?
Right. Oh yeah, no, Randy he has steak with ketchup too. Which honestly, if that's the thing, then he's the next Patrick Mahomes. If that's really a thing, then he's going to be a Hall of Famer at some point. Yeah, like I said, I'm with you. I think Wentz is an upgrade. I don't think it's great. And I say this is a guy who last year believed in the idea of a Carson Wentz resurrection, working with Frank Reich there in Indianapolis, and it just didn't happen. And having conversations with people, talking to our pal Matt Harmon over at Yahoo, and he made the point that Carson Wentz seems like he's like a decent quarterback. He's an average quarterback who gets really streaky and really hot. And that year that he was on that MVP run when the Eagles ultimately won the Super Bowl with Wentz injured, he just happened to hit a heater, like a season-long heater, and that got him to a point of being an MVP candidate. He hasn't hit anything like that since. So I think he's kind of an average quarterback. And so I guess that's better than Heineke, who's, I guess, a slightly below average quarterback, but it doesn't get me excited.
Very nice guy.
Very nice guy. We had a chance to interview him at Super Bowl. Super nice guy. I was very impressed. I think we both were, the fact that he sort of understood, where he is in his career and who he is as an NFL player. But was a really good guy to talk to. But
he's way smarter than us too. Yeah. No.
Also not a guy I'm drafting.
His college courses were insane.
I mean, he was taking like next level math and like, all kind of stuff courses. Yeah, it was crazy.
Cynthia Freeland's the only one who can hold a conversation with him, I think.
Pretty much. Yeah. I would love to see him and Cynthia sit down and talk like next level math and analytics and that kind of stuff. That would be, I wouldn't understand most of it, but I'd pay money to listen to it at least. All right. So that gets us to who is the first commander you are drafting, who is a sleeper, and who is a player to avoid.
First player drafted, Terry McLaurin. I am still fine taking him as a wide receiver 2. I have him inside my top 20, but not nearly as high as I was on him a year ago when I thought Ryan Fitzpatrick was his savior. Sleeper, Jahan Dotson is someone that I've been targeting in the later rounds of my drafts. I also think if you're in an even deeper league, Curtis Samuel deserves some love. I think they have a really, really talented receiver group, which maybe they can lift Carson Wentz. I think all three of those guys could play at a high level. And outside of Terry McLaurin, you get the other two guys as complete afterthoughts. Player to avoid, it's really just this running game. Like, whichever one is going later, like I said, if you could get one in like 9th, 10th round, Robinson, Gibson, I'm cool with that. But if you have to start paying up or even choosing which one you want, like, I'm good. I'll let other people deal with that headache.
Yeah, yeah. I'm with you. McLaurin's the first guy off the board without a doubt. I do want to get to the point where we're talking about him as like a bona fide wide receiver 1, but until Washington, either Washington figures out its quarterback situation or McLaurin gets himself free to a spot with a better quarterback, I think he's sort of relegated to wide receiver 2 status. So you had Jahan Dotson as a sleeper, which I sort of am on board with as well. I will say for now, I will make my sleeper Brian Robinson. Sort of assuming that he's going to be the RB2 that has the potential to maybe get an upgrade in opportunity if something happens with Gibson, whether he just plays poorly or, not wishing it on him, but if he gets hurt, then I think that opens the door for Brian Robinson. So I will, just to kind of pivot a little bit, I will make him my sleeper. My player to avoid, Carson Wentz. I'm not doing that. I think there's too much depth at quarterback, and I guess unless you're in a 2 QB league or super flex league, something like that, I can't really make it. I can't make an argument to have Carson Wentz on the roster, and certainly not to consider drafting him at any point. All right, that gets us to the end of the NFC East and the New York Football Giants. Even though the baseball Giants left New York 60 plus years ago. Doesn't matter. The football Giants last year were 4-13. Daniel Jones, your passing leader in, kind of part-time duty because of injuries. 2,428 yards, 10 touchdowns, 7 interceptions, QB 27. Your rushing leaders, it was actually a tie last year. Saquon Barkley and Devontae Booker each had 593 yards. Each of them had 2 rushing touchdowns. Saquon was the RB 30 by nature of having some more receptions. Devontae Booker was the RB 33. And then we're receiving. Kenny Golladay was your yardage leader, 37 catches, 521 yards, no touchdowns. The wide receiver, 79 gross. Evan Ingram was your receptions leader with 46 catches, 408 yards, 3 receiving touchdowns. He was the tight end, 23. So looking at this team, I feel like we talked about Saquon, and I see the ADP going up. I'm totally on board with that. I think he's going to be fine this year as long as he stays healthy. So I kind of pivoted to the pass catchers because it's a really muddy, confusing group. Kadarius Toney is a guy that people are sort of getting high on, understandably knowing that he is a reserve guy, right? You're not counting on Kadarius Toney to be, wide receiver 2 for you on a week-to-week basis. On Fantasy Football Calculator at last check, he was the wide receiver 44. Do you feel like that's right? Are you higher? Are you lower? Where are you on Kadarius Toney?
I'm much higher. Marcus, I like to consider myself the leader of the Kadarius Toney hype train.
Okay.
Because like in like May, I was putting up articles and tweets and stats about this guy, and then the drumbeat just got louder and louder. And I know it's a weird player to be like, I'm this guy's hype train leader, but I really do believe Kadarius Toney is going to break out this year, and I have him ranked as my wide receiver 32. I took him in the 9th round of that draft we're in last night, Marcus. But and I love that you could continue to get him at a discount. But if pushed, I would take him as high as the 7th round. I would say, and there's a lot of reasons to like Kadarius Toney. One, I know a lot of people say, oh, he did all his damage in one game. He hit over 180 yards against the number 1 ranked Cowboys defense. And since 2000, there's been 10 rookies that have topped 180 yards in a game. And this is a game that he got kicked out of for throwing a punch in. So he could have topped 200. All but one of those rookie receivers have gone on to have a 1,000-yard season. The other one is Keelan Cole. And then Also, he averaged 2.2 yards per route ran and had a 30% target share when he was on the field last year. Others receivers who met those thresholds were all elite last year. Devontae Adams, Antonio Brown, I'm forgetting the others, but they're all like high-end wide receiver ones. And then not only so the stats he passes that test. When I watch this guy play, I'm reminded of like uh Tyreek Hill. Like there's not many people who have this kind of shiftiness and speed. So I really think Kadarius Toney could break out in a big way this year. And if you take one thing, I guess that I said in this podcast, it's take a shot on Kadarius Toney, especially if you get him in like the 9th, 10th round.
I haven't been able to draft Kadarius Toney because inevitably I'm in a draft with somebody who loves him more, who will take him a little bit early. I mean, I like his skill set. I like his attributes. And I like the fact that the Giants basically said, we want to sort of feature him a little bit more. We want to get him the ball in space, let him do his thing. I mean, you'd watch some of those highlights of him just breaking people's ankles, right? You just get him out there, let him get the ball, let him work. So I do like him. I do like him sort of around the 9th, 10th round, but I inevitably end up in a draft with somebody who's willing to take him in the 7th or 8th round. So because of that, I don't know that I have many shares of Kadarius Toney, but I'm interested to see kind of what becomes of him. And I feel like we'd love all these Giants receivers a little bit more if we knew that we could get more out of Daniel Jones. I think, there's still a little bit of hope for what Daniel Jones can be and whether or not Brian Daboll can sort of unlock that. But I think the uncertainty there kind of keeps us down on the Giants pass catchers, which gets me to Kenny Golladay. When I was in the Kings Classic draft last week, in Canton, Ohio, 14-team league. Golladay came off the board late in the 12th round, and nobody really batted an eye. It wasn't like, oh man, I forgot. Like it was like, yeah, no, we knew we were there. He was there, and we just didn't draft him. This is a far cry from a guy who we were pegging as a wide receiver 1 just a couple of years ago. He right now is wide receiver 69 on Fantasy Football Calculator. I mentioned he did not catch a touchdown last year, just 521 receiving yards on 37 catches. Have we gone too far on writing him off? Because I look at it and say, look, man, it can't really be worse for him, right? Like, I understand people's concern, but I feel like we have completely written him off, and maybe we shouldn't, or am I wrong?
I don't think you're wrong. I do think he's getting overlooked, and I think he will outlive that ADP, but it's just that I don't think he has anywhere close to the ceiling that we thought. I think Kadarius Toney has a higher ceiling. I think you could even make the argument about Wan'Dale Robinson having a higher ceiling. I just never thought Golladay with Daniel Jones was a good fit because he was always a downfield 50-50 type receiver, and that's just not Daniel Jones' style of play. Plus, I mean, he's of the Giants receivers, he's by far the one that could do the least amount of damage after the catch. So I think he'll outlive that wide receiver 69, but pretty much what I'm saying is it'll be on someone else's team. I think early in like best ball drafts, I was taking him because I was like, this guy's going way too late. But then once like Wan'Dale Robinson started getting more hype too, as potentially someone who could do a lot of damage after the catch out of the slot, I was like, you know what? I think that's the Giants' late round receiver I'd rather take a shot on.
Any worries that Wan'Dale Robinson and Kadarius Toney are very similar, that they may kind of cannibalize each other?
Definitely, because both of them are great at being, getting quick open, like one move, you're open, and you give the ball into space and watch what he could do after. The reason why I like Kadarius Toney is because I believe he is the better deep threat as well. I think he's also a little bit bigger, better utilized in the red zone. So, and I just think he's a better athlete all around. So Wan'Dale Robinson is really good. Definitely can take away from Kadarius Toney. I prefer Toney, but I will say you get Wan'Dale Robinson at a huge discount if you're comparing the two.
I mean, definitely you get him at a huge discount. I think I've probably drafted Wan'Dale Robinson more than I've drafted Kenny Golladay, because as much as I'm saying, maybe we've gone too far, we also get to a point in the draft where Golladay, I think, is a reasonable draft pick, and I find guys I like more. So for all of my bluster saying that maybe we should draft Kenny Golladay more, I have not lived up to that in my own personal life. So take that for what it's worth. All right. So then first player drafted, a sleeper, and a player to avoid.
Saquon Barkley, first player drafted. I think you could take him late first round. I prefer him in the second round, but I'm seeing him more and more go in the first, and I really don't have a problem with that. I have him ranked actually as my RB7 ahead of Najee Harris, which might seem like a hot take, but fantasy Twitter would love it. A sleeper, I think Wan'Dale Robinson is the big sleeper here. I Kadarius Toney's gotten too much hype to really fit into that, I would say, but Robinson is a still get him in the later rounds. I got him. I don't even think I got him in our draft last night because I was full of receivers at that point. But he went in like the 14th round, which seems very late. Player to avoid, I would say Kenny Golladay, the tight end. Like to me though, this is another one of those offenses, Marcus, where I feel like most people are appropriately priced. Like I'm cool with taking a flyer on Daniel Jones as my second quarterback, and I've already spoke about the other receivers and stuff.
Yeah, so for me, it's Saquon, obviously, is the first guy off the board, and I'm with you. I think a second round pick on Saquon is not at all ridiculous, and I'm sort of glad to see everybody's kind of come back around on him and what he can be. I do like Wan'Dale Robinson as a sleeper. I'll give you kind of a deep sleeper in this offense, and that's Colin Johnson, who's starting to get a lot more attention. He's starting to get some run with the starters in preseason games, and I saw him a couple weeks ago get a good number of targets too. So there are a lot of pass catchers, most of whom are meh. And so I'm not, I'm saying if you're in a deep league, if you're late round looking for a dart throw sort of flyer, Colin Johnson maybe is a name to keep in your back pocket. So we'll see kind of what happens with that. But he's a guy that you sort of want to know. In terms of players to avoid, it's pretty much any wide receiver that's not Tony or Robinson, or I guess Colin Johnson in the right situation. So, I mean, that would be Kenny Golladay. That would be Darius Slayton. I know Sterling Shepard is still sort of working his way back from injury, and I don't know what his situation is going to be once we get to the regular season, but there's nothing there in terms of their wide receivers that really, really gets me excited. So, I would just tend to stay away mostly from that position group outside from the couple of guys that we really talked about here in the last few minutes. There it is. That's our look at the NFC East.